I saw this guy many years later, and I actually met him on social media, and I've had conversations with him, and I've told him this story. But the first time I talked to a composer um, was again one of those concerts at the Ofunamdis Orchestra, and they played a concerto for percussion by a woman composer called Marcela Rodriguez. And it turns out that she was a kind of like a distant acquaintance of my parents.
Oh,
So
wow.
went and said hi, you know, and my mom said, Charlie's going to be a composer. And she said, I think she said something like, oh, poor Charlie, something like that,
Yeah,
something to
yeah,
that
yeah.
effect.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, really? Is it difficult? Is it complicated? But that didn't sway my intentions, but it did worry me just a little bit.
Yeah, that's well, you had the opportunity. You met Baljinder Sekhan, who was my
Yeah.
composition teacher for my master's, and also the first guest I had on this podcast. And that's like exactly something he would say. It's like, "Oh, you're going to be a composer? I'm sorry to hear," as a joke, you know. So
Yeah.
maybe she was joking, but
Oh, she was obviously joking. Yeah,
yeah,
completely a joke. But jokes have a basis on reality. So,
of
and
course.
in a way, I guess what it means is that life as an artist is hard. It can be unpredictable, but that's life. I mean, I don't suppose life as an engineer is easy. I mean, different career paths lead to different types of difficulty, but difficulty is there, I think.
Mm, yeah. So,
Hmm.
can you share a bit of an overview, connect the dots, so to speak, of your creative journey from this point? So you make the decision. I'm going to be a composer, and then I imagine you probably went to university for that, maybe, or you started studies of some kind. Do you feel like you followed a more conventional path as a composer from that point until today, or do you feel like there were maybe unexpected twists and turns along the way that took you off of that kind of conventional path?
Well, I think there are conventional and non-conventional aspects to my career. When I was studying at the university, I had this idea of becoming a composer and just like creating scores and having musicians play the music. And that's what they prepared us for at school, and that's what I started doing. And my first experiences were like, it's actually funny because the first things we did was to like hire ensembles, like working ensembles as a collective of student composition students, and we produced a couple of concerts, and those went quite well, I think. And then there was a huge opportunity by the Mexico City Philharmonic, which was a different orchestra. It was just like a call for scores for a reading session, you
Mm,
know?
yeah.
So if you were a student and you had an orchestral score, you could submit it. And if you were selected, the piece would actually be read. And funnily enough, I had been writing an orchestral piece on my free time, uh, apart from school, and it actually got selected, and that was my introduction to hearing my music being played by an orchestra. And I was like very young. I guess I was about 21 years old or something, and it was an amazing experience. And from the pieces that were read that day, there was a panel of jurors, and they selected a few pieces to actually be presented in the season by the orchestra. So I remember very well because my piece was like 8 to 10 minutes long, more or less. And then they played Mahler's Second Symphony. So, I mean, I had the feeling like if you played in a band and you opened for Metallica, something like that,
Right, right,
you
right.
know?
Yeah.
And, you know, But I was 21. I didn't know anything about the world, you know? So I just assumed, like, oh, this is going to be my life from now on. How wrong I was. How wrong I was, because the next orchestral experience I had came several years later. But I basically, that was the first part of my career, was like trying to get my music being played by ensembles and orchestras with varying degrees of success. The orchestra thing had to wait a little. I then attempted to apply to a master's degree at the conservatorium in Amsterdam, and unfortunately, I wasn't selected. I didn't make it the cut, so that put me in a situation where I had a bit of a crisis,
Mm, yeah.
because I was accustomed to being a quite a good student, I thought, and I felt like my music made sense and so on. So that was a big kind of like a little blow to my ego, and that made me think about many things. So I had a moment where I realized I have to change something. My music isn't like all it could be. I want to make it more unique, more of what I am capable of doing. So I decided to form my own ensemble where I wouldn't only be composing music but also performing my music on the percussion instruments I've been playing. Because yeah, I didn't mention this, but after the drums, in my teenage years, I was also very much into hand percussion. So I had a bunch of like conga drums and a djembe and a bunch of stuff. So that was part of me, and I said it's time to integrate this into my music making. So I like called up some of my musician friends, and some replied, and we started a band. Basically, we started a band, and we called it chamber rock because we had this idea of making like chamber music, but we had the vibe of a rock band. That was our concept. And that project lasted for about 10 years, more or less.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Micromaker by Loose Leaf Transmissions. We hope you enjoyed this brief glimpse into the inner workings of the creative life. If this resonated with you, be sure to check out the full conversation on Music Maker with Tyler Klein, a podcast exploring craft and process, philosophy and inspiration, and the honest, often messy parts of being an artist, creative uncertainty, purpose and identity, and resilience. You can find Music Maker wherever you get your podcasts or by visiting musicmakerpodcast.com.